The crisp sound of pages flipping was pleasant to Han Li's ears. However, Li Feiyu hated that sound. He ignored Han Li, who was concentrating on reading, and walked towards the mountain spring. He pulled out a long saber from the mud and started practicing. Han Li glanced over at him. Seeing his friend's overwhelming energy, Han Li stopped paying attention to Li Feiyu's movements and shifted his concentration back to the book in his hands. Han Li could read at a shocking speed of 10 lines per glance. He quickly finished the thick book and grabbed another book without even lifting his head to look. He kept his eyes partly closed while reading, showing a pensive expression from time to time. His eyes were glued to the book's pages and unwilling to detach themselves for just a single moment. The way that his head followed his gaze and moved back and forth gave him the appearance of an elegant intellectual. As time flew by, Han Li rapidly browsed through the Blinking Sword Art's many manuals. When he finished reading the 11th manual, he suddenly stopped and threw the book back in his bag. He closed his eyes to rest for a little bit. Once he felt better, he sat down cross-legged and started cultivating the eternal spring arts, striving to comprehend all the information he had just read. Han Li's facial expression shifted back and forth from excited and lively to serious and dispirited. Not knowing how much time had passed, Han Li finally opened his eyes and was shocked by what he saw in front of him. He didn't realize that Li Feiyu had sneaked up so close to his face while his eyes had been closed. Li Feiyu was in such close proximity that their noses had almost touched. "What are you doing? Aren't you supposed to be practicing with your saber? Junior disciple Han, can't you see what time it is right now? You're asking a stupid question." Li Feiyu pulled back his body and twitched his lips. Han Li realized just then that the sunlight had dimmed. He lifted his head and looked up. The sky was currently a bluish-gray color, which meant that it was already evening. Cough. Time has really flown by while I was cultivating. I didn't notice that it was this late already. Han Li stood up and moved around a little bit. So, did you find anything interesting in the book? Li Feiyu looked at Han Li passionately, hoping that Han Li could tell him about the blinking sword art. It's not bad. I think this technique will suit me. Huh. What do you mean, not bad? Tell me the actual truth, said Li Feiyu in a slightly dissatisfied tone. Specifically, these rare books are a combination of different techniques. In other words, there is no full set in here. They have all been pieced together from different martial arts styles, Han Li slowly explained. Then what is the meaning of the name, Blinking Sword Art? Is it even an actual sword art? Why is the name so strange? Li Feiyu was still unsatisfied by Han Li's response, so he kept asking questions. Blinking sword art actually exists, but the manuals that pertain to it are only a small portion within the big mashup, Han Li said with patience. As for the name of the blinking sword art, there is a special reason for it. What reason? Why can't you say it all at once? Stop talking sentence by sentence, you are just like the old people in town. Li Feiyu glared at Han Li. He couldn't stand Han Li's slow explanation. At Li Feiyu's urging, Han Li couldn't do anything else but speed up his clarification. According to the books, this sword art manipulates light to affect the opponent's eyesight, thereby giving the user a chance to land a decisive blow. It often makes your opponents lose their lives the moment they blink, hence the name, Blinking Sword Art. There is actually such a strange sword art? There are quite a few eccentric martial artists in this world. Li Feiyu showed a lot of interest after listening, but quieted right after Han Li's next sentence. This sword art has 3 restrictions. It cannot be practiced by those who have cultivated true qi, those who lack perseverance, or lastly, those without talent. When Li Feiyu heard the first requirement, he immediately gave up on cultivating the sword art. His true qi was already trained to a formidable stage. There was no way that he would be willing to disable his own internal strength to practice this new skill, which he knew next to nothing about. Since he had completely lost interest in the rare books, Li Feiyu didn't want to stay there any longer. He stood up and was getting ready to leave, but before he left, he warned Han Li to copy the rare books as soon as possible so he could bring back all the original copies when they next met. Even though these rare books weren't valued very much by other people, but if they disappear for a long time, it would still attract attention. Not long after Li Feiyu left, Han Li left the place as well. The whole landscape of the mountainous region was covered by layers of fog, causing it to be slightly dark. A forest of thistles grew on both sides of the narrow mountain paths. When a gust of mountain wind blew through the forest, a wah-la-la sound would be emitted. The leaves on the branches on both sides of the path would flutter about frenziedly, akin to bared fangs and dancing claws. On the somewhat seemingly sinister mountain road, Han Li rushed toward God Hand Valley. Because he left mountain when the sun was beginning to dim, the sky was completely dark by the time he walked halfway to the valley. If it hadn't been for his eternal spring arts, which sharpened his night vision, Han Li wouldn't have been able to rush down the mountain in this dark environment. After all, this small road was not well tread. The road was filled with dangerously placed twists and turns. If one were not careful, an accident was likely to occur, thereby claiming his or her fragile life. Walking in the pitch-black forest, Han Li heightened his senses. Ordinary humans wouldn't be able to clearly see the path in front of them, but for Han Li, it was as clear as day. Despite his advantage, Han Li continued to be cautious. His caution was not honed by hunting ferocious wild beasts, but rather developed into a habit by hiding from Dr. Mo. After the Seven Mysteries sect relocated to the Rainbow Celestial Mountains, the beasts and creatures inhabiting the mountains and forests were eradicated in order to ensure the safety of the sect members. In addition to the ferocious beasts, even normal wild animals, such as the venomous snakes, had been hunted and turned into food for the disciples. Han Li's vigilance was not a part of his natural personality. He had developed it after experiencing Dr. Mo's scheme so that he could prevent any unwanted dangers. The mountain's bone-chilling wind got stronger and stronger, giving off a shrill sound that caused his hair to stand on end. The distant Han Li, upon sensing the wind, hastened his pace as he stepped across the boundary that marked the edge of the forest. He lightly sighed. Walking alone in this pitch dark made his heart grow heavy. Han Li quickened his pace once more, increasing his stride in order to leave the forest as soon as possible. All of a sudden, a strong gust of wind blew towards him. After enduring the strong gust of wind, Han Li paused as if he had discovered something bizarre. He furrowed his brows and tilted his neck, as if he was trying to listen for something. Han Li's expression quickly turned serious. He heard the sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. Although the footsteps were extremely light and the owners of the footsteps were far away from him, Han Li could determine that there were two individuals rushing closer towards his direction. He lightly leapt away and hid himself in the forest next to the mountain path without making a single sound. There was a large tree about 30 meters away from the path. Han Li hid himself behind the tree, curling himself into a ball. If one were to examine the tree from the front, he or she would not be able to find any traces of Han Li. It was only after finding a good hiding spot that Han Li gradually began to calm down. This time, Han Li was not being overly sensitive, there was something truly strange going on. It was highly illogical for two people to prowl around a remote location in the middle of the night. Han Li was 80% positive that the two mysterious figures were hiding something fishy up their sleeves. Han Li did not want the mysterious figures to kill him for discovering their secret, even if he did so by accident. However, if there were no dangers facing Han Li, then there would be no problem for him to eavesdrop on their secrets. Han Li was no hypocrite, he merely understood that if good fortune delivered itself to his doorstep, he would be a fool not to take advantage of it. Quote ellipsis. Descending the mountains, arrange well, time, people. Commander. Waves of low-sounding voices drifted over from far away. At this moment, the mountain wind was blowing extremely strongly. As a result, most of the words had been scattered by the wind, leaving only a small portion of the conversation that made its way into Han Li's ears. Han Li was astounded to think that he had managed to discover a portion of their secret. In this region, the only person with the title of commander was the Golden Wolf Jia Tianlong from the Feral Wolf Gang. This person had great enmity with the Seven Mysteries sect. Now that Han Li had heard his name in this remote location, it provided much food for thought. Jia Tianlong was a ruthless, blood-drinking demonic figure in the eyes of the Seven Mysteries sect's disciples. Rumors told that he was a broad-shouldered man with a fat waist, long teeth, and a livid face. He supposedly ate human flesh and drank human blood 3 times a day. Many of the Seven Mysteries sect's junior disciples were frightened out of their wits just by hearing the rumors of such a devilish figure. However, according to Li Feiyu, the rumors were far from the truth. Contrary to the rumors, Jia Tianlong was skinny and weak with exquisite facial features. He was quite young, in his early 30s. The rumors regarding how he ruthlessly killed people, however, were true. Jia Tianlong could not be judged by his appearance. After all, based on his facial features alone, no one would expect him to be able to control the other members of the gang. Han Li gathered his thoughts as he tried to remember all that he knew about Jia Tianlong. Sucking in a cold breath, he curled up even tighter, trying to lower the sound of his breathing. This time, steal, list of names, kill. Another part of the conversation drifted over, clearer than before. The two mysterious figures were getting closer and closer to Han Li. Han Li did not even dare to breathe loudly. He knew that if he were to be discovered now, only death would await him. The two of them were likely spies from the Feral Wolf Gang, and they would definitely not let an outsider know of their secret. Plan, must, not, quickly. Gradually, the voices of these two mysterious figures got even lower. It seemed like they had reached the crux of their discussion, which meant that they were about to reveal the most crucial information. After a short moment, the voices got louder again, but Han Li could not hear them clearly, he could only hear the sound of the mountain wind blowing through. The outlines of these two mysterious figures passed by Han Li and gradually disappeared into the distance. Han Li still did not dare to make any movements for a long period of time. Only after activating the Eternal Spring Arts and determining that there was no one near him in a 30-meter radius did he slowly reveal himself. This time around, he had avoided certain death. Luckily for him, he managed to discover the movements of these two spies early on. If Han Li had met them face to face, he would surely have been killed to protect their secret. Even worse, based on his own martial skills, he did not even have a single shred of hope that he would survive such a confrontation. Han Li stood motionlessly at the same location. Lost in his thoughts, his fingers lightly rubbed his chin while he gazed at the direction where the two spies had disappeared. From the fragments of the secret conversation he heard, he could gauge that in the near future, the Feral Wolf Gang would undertake some action that would prove greatly detrimental to the Seven Mysteries sect. There was a high probability that this action would have a close connection with the list of names that was previously mentioned. What surprised him the most was that Han Li had already identified the identity of one of the figures despite of not being able to see their facial features. Even though the two mysterious figures had not spoken much, Han Li could match one of their low voices to the kitchen steward on the mountain of the Seven Mysteries sect. The steward, who had sold rabbits to Han Li back then, gave him a low impression. He had a mustache and an ignorant face, and he loved to take advantage of others. To think that he was actually a spy from the Feral Wolf Gang once again reminded Han Li that one could never be too cautious. But reflecting back upon it, this was something to be expected. Only with a position such as a kitchen steward could a spy been able to enter and leave the mountains and pass along any news that he or she had obtained without arousing any suspicions. However, Han Li was quite unfamiliar with the voice of the other spy. He must have never met this person before. However, judging from the spy's voice, his age must be relatively young, around 20 years old. Unfortunately, in order to ensure his own safety, Han Li didn't dare to steal a glance. He feared that these two men practiced martial skills that could detect his spying gaze, enabling them to be aware of nearby outsiders. The potential gains were not worth the potential losses. After this slightly dangerous event, the trip after became quite safe. Han Li finally returned home after his regular supper time. As always, Dr. Mo mysteriously paid him a visit and gave him a glance that lacked any interest. Aside from delivering a few concocted medicines, he normally left Han Li to do as he wished. Han Li seemed as if he had not noticed the medicines that Dr. Mo had delivered. They were all created from rare medicinal ingredients that were gathered from his previous expedition away from the mountain. Han Li believed that Dr. Mo had abandoned his expectations of him and had some other malevolent scheme prepared. For now, Han Li completely disregarded the precious medicine Dr. Mo had delivered. But in order to avoid raising suspicion from Dr. Mo, he pinched his nose and swallowed it down. He threw away any suspicion that the medicines were laced with poison. Currently, any harm Dr. Mo inflicted onto Han Li would only be hurting himself. With regards to seeing the Feral Wolf Gang spies, Han Li thought of the best method to deal with them on the way back to his residence. Although he wasn't deeply passionate towards the Seven Mysteries sect, he was halfway to becoming an inner disciple. How could he possibly be impartial toward a harmful affair toward the Seven Mysteries sect before his eyes and ignore it completely? He had long thought of a best candidate to handle this matter, Li Feiyu, the famous senior disciple Li. According to Han Li's observation, perhaps the reason Li Feiyu consumed the essence extraction pill was because he greatly valued being in the center of attention far greater than a common man and possessed no small amount of ambition. He had always dreamed of entering the upper divisions of the Seven Mysteries sect, further becoming the focus of attention. Han Li had previously suspected that Li Feiyu probably thought he was in the last stage of his life, and thus he became even more frantic and hungry for fame. If Han Li allowed Li Feiyu to perform a large contribution to the Seven Mysteries sect, Li Feiyu would certainly be excited to no end. This way, Han Li would be able to repay Li Feiyu for stealing the sword manuals. Thinking of the blinking sword art, Han Li felt a wave of emotion. Han Li did not tell any lies regarding the blinking sword art to his good friend. This sword art truly did not suit Li Feiyu. However, Han Li did not reveal many of the details. An essential rule of survival was that one should always keep a few secrets, regardless of who they were being kept from. Although Li Feiyu and Han Li seemed to have a close relationship, it was hardly exceptional. However, the contents written in these secret manuals were quite different from common martial teachings. It seemed to Han Li that, rather than to say it was a sword art, it would be more appropriate to call it sword ingenuity. It was a complete integration of weather, timing, favorable positioning, and secretive assassination techniques against all kinds of factors and people. Such a skill was rarely seen. It was pure killing skill. As soon as the sword was drawn, death approached. These books described different environments, times of day, and the utilization of diligently practiced secretive sword skills. There were all kinds of sure-kill techniques that would cut down an enemy in a single strike. The manuals taught those that learned these sword skills to make use of every tree and strand of grass in the terrain, as well as light rays of all intensities and angles, in order to hinder the opponent's vision. During the split second the opponent was weakened, the user would take advantage of it and kill them in an instant. This was a mysterious technique that required much attention and skill to execute. Without the slightest talent, it would be impossible to understand this sword art. Therefore, those who learned this mysterious technique must excel in the five senses. Their vision and hearing must far exceed that of an ordinary person by many levels if there were to be the promise of even the slightest results. Even if they had the requirements to achieve that stage, there would inevitably be a few disciples who would covet the blinking sword art's formidable power and choose to cultivate it immediately after reaching the minimum requirement. However, mastering the sword art required an excessive amount of effort. In addition, it had even harsher requirements. Those who cultivated this mysterious technique could not possess pure inner strength. Otherwise, their body would suffer from complications when trying to execute the technique. This made cultivating the sword art quite difficult. Even if someone with true qi was lucky enough to succeed, if the true qi in their body became too vigorous during actual combat, the sword maneuvers would unwittingly produce deformations. These deformities left large gaps for the opponent to take advantage of, thereby causing life-threatening calamities. These requirements basically severed away the majority of those attempting to cultivate the technique. In Jiang Hu there was a common saying, to practice the fist and neglect skill will end with one's effort in futility. To not practice inner strength was an enormous taboo. Anyone who would abandon their cultivation of true qi and spread their name with ineffable swordplay would truly be the laughingstock of Jiang Hu. Therefore, only the remaining few still had the intention to continue cultivating the technique. However, even if those individuals had plenty of talent and had no problem with abandoning true qi, the final difficult barrier would thoroughly dispel their intentions of continuing down this path. The final obstacle was the excessively complex nature of the blinking sword art and the painstaking memorization of the meticulous conditions in which each of the sword maneuvers within the sword manuals could be applied. Seeing such a large pile of thick secret manuals would intimidate any average person at first glance. Each sword manual represented a sword maneuver, and each sword maneuver could be broken into hundreds of sword forms. Every sword form must be carefully selected for different environments and different times of day. To fully master the blinking sword arts, one had to make complete use of different techniques for every situation. The tremendous quantity of sword skills, let alone cultivation, could make one's head ache. Not to mention that this further required the complete memorization and comprehension of every sword maneuver and sword form. The previously mentioned abnormal requirements have obstructed an innumerable number of motivated disciples, making them endlessly curse in their heart at the elder who had established this sword art. With the passage of time, the Seven Mysteries sect gradually lost interest in this sword technique. Believing it impossible for someone to train in this martial technique, many disciples thought that the elder had baselessly and casually fabricated these martial teachings as he was facing death's door. Otherwise, why would there be these excessive requirements? This was deliberately designed to be difficult for disciples that were unaware of how things stood. As a result, these secret manuals were put away on a shelf, no longer catching anyone's interest. Those who complained did not know that the elder who created this particular sword art had a very deep and profound level of skill. However, his meridians were injured during a battle against another cultivator of Jiang Hu. As such, he had been unable to cultivate true qi. In order to protect his status in the sect, the elder had kept the matter a secret. From then on, he acted mysteriously, pretending that he had overwhelming strength to deceive all of the members in the sect. Ever since then, however, it had been undeniable that he lacked the ability to protect himself. He had to rely on wit and experience from that moment on, protecting himself through deception. That era was when the Seven Mysteries sect stood at the height of its power. When this elder realized that his power would never recover, he became depressed and organized many covert raids on the smaller sects. He acted behind his superiors' back by using deceptive schemes that hid his movements. During the raids, he forcibly seized many secret martial arts manuals, hoping to find a top-level skill that he could cultivate without true qi. After many years of research, the elder did indeed discover many mysterious techniques that didn't require true qi. However, none of them suited him. He was greatly depressed. However, this elder had talent and intelligence that far surpassed the norm. Suffering from depression and frustration, he decided to combine all the unfathomable martial techniques that he had discovered, thus creating his own set of top-tier skills. Once the notion appeared in his mind, he was fully obsessed by it. He intended to create a special set of techniques unique to himself. This was something that all martial artists aspired to do. With his full attention and effort, he threw himself wholeheartedly into research. Eventually, fearing distractions, he entered into closed-door meditation and did not bother himself with matters of the sect. Creating a set of skills was an extremely difficult thing to do. Not to mention the fact that the skill he intended to create had to be a top-tier skill that did not require true qi to execute. Creating this unprecedented martial skill was a process filled with many hardships that vastly surpassed his expectations. However, his determination and willpower was beyond that of a normal human. After half a lifetime's worth of efforts that he expended over the course of 10 years, he finally created his skill, the blinking sword art. That elder was extremely excited, spreading the joyous news to his sect members. However, he discovered that the Seven Mysteries sect had regressed tremendously and was now a shadow of its former self. The Seven Mysteries sect been attacked and surrounded by an alliance of various sects, it could be wiped out at any moment. The elder was furious and alarmed upon hearing the news. Using the skill he had just created, he unleashed its godly might, killing many top-tier opponents and terrifying those that remained. Under the encirclement of the various sects, he managed to slaughter a bloody path out to safety, creating immense merit for the Seven Mysteries sect. Regretfully, although the sect managed to avert the disaster, the elder was at the brink of death. He could only pass on his newly created skill and place it in the Seven Supreme Hall, leaving it behind for the other disciples before he passed away. What was even more regretful was that, even after all these years, none of the following generations had managed to successfully cultivate this particular skill other than Han Li. As a result, this bright pearl was hidden under the dust, never to see the light of the sun. Han Li had no idea of the history behind the blinking sword art. Even if he knew, he would not be moved. To him, as long as this particular sword art could allow him to protect his own life when he clashed against Dr. Mo, it was already sufficient. Why care about its history? Its creation process? Han Li had no interest in such mundane details. He was a practical man. Han Li would not be interested in spending his time and energy to understand things that had no benefits to him. In his own residence, Han Li lit an oil lamp as he laid in front of the table. He repeatedly flipped through the pages of the manual underneath the candlelight. He had no intentions of copying the manuals. What he was planned to do was to use his eidetic memory and memorize all the contents within the secret manuals. This way, he could always have the contents in his mind without arousing suspicions. Regarding Dr. Mo, Han Li still maintained a high sense of alertness. He was not foolish enough to think that he would be safe because Dr. Mo had slackened his supervision. If Dr. Mo knew about all the secret manuals he had in his residence, wouldn't all his plans come to naught? Under the dusky yellow light from the lamp, crackling sounds rang out, reminding Han Li that he had been studying for a long time and that it was time for him to get some rest. However, Han Li had no intention of stopping. He fully immersed himself in the contents of the secret manuals, absorbing all the information they contained into his mind. As the light popped, a shadow appeared on the wall and began to sway back and forth in the flickering light. Han Li continued to sit there, immersed in the sword manuals, and didn't budge an inch. His body contrasted sharply with this almost demonic shape. However, if one looked closely, he or she would see a sort of harmony between the two. As time passed, the shadow behind Han Li became fuzzy as it slowly faded away into nothingness. Outside, dawn had broken. Unknowingly, Han Li had spent an entire night studying. Pa! A soft sound rang out as the light from the lamp died out. Only then did Han Li come to his senses. He lifted his head and looked at the oil lamp before glancing at the daylight that shone outside his residence. A bitter smile rose from the bottom of his heart. To think that he had actually spent a day studying and researching killing techniques. He had truly changed from his former self. Han Li lost himself in contemplation for a moment before standing up and stretching his body, causing cracking sounds to ring out. After doing so, he left his residence and went to collect a basin of cold water from the nearby well in order to wash himself. Han Li activated the eternal spring arts, regaining his energy and causing all the fatigue from the previous night to melt away. After a whole night of study and research, Han Li already knew that he had to fully understand the principles behind this set of martial arts techniques. If he did not practice it for at least 8 to 10 years, there was no way he would be able to master it. Even a genius would at least need 2 or 3 years in order to yield some results. Time waits for no one.